another way of thinking of the future. So, welcome. The session is called The Entertainment Entrepreneurs and is brought to you by the Entertainment Masterclass. We have, as you can see, a few distinguished guests here coming from all around the world. And before we begin, I will introduce them to you before they introduce themselves. And like you said, take up all 1.5 hours before they end. To my left, I have Anna Brackenhill, coming from Sweden. And for those who know the show Survivor, she is the one who first produced it.
It didn't work in Germany.
It didn't work in Germany. It worked everywhere else. And it's
didn't work in Australia.
And
either.
in Australia,
It was
there you
never
go.
on in Australia. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, the important thing for you to know, it wasn't Charlie Parson, it wasn't John de Mol, probably, who claims anything in reality television is his. And then you founded Strix, a production company.
I didn't found it, but I was managing director.
You were the managing
for many
director.
years.
Then from that, Talpa, Scandinavia, which was owned by the holding of John de Mol. So you were Talpa, Scandinavia, the CEO. From that on Silverback, and now it's Scandinavian Studios, which
and
you
in
had.
between that, it was ITV.
ITV, oh,
Yeah.
What?
UK channel, commercial broadcaster.
Yeah, no, but who did they buy?
Yeah.
They bought
Yeah.
Silverback. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, so
And now
a lot of
and now
acquisitions in
something
between,
else. Yeah.
and now it's Scandinavian Studios.
Yeah.
Next to her, we have David Nahmani coming from Orange. You are the director of business development and partnerships at Orange, and you basically are part of a department, a division that is spearheading innovation to create mass market digital experiences for Orange.
Yeah, definitely. From social networks to second screen, social TV, to new domains that we believe are at stake from Orange. Next domain being Internet of Things and digital education, but one key domain being video, TV meeting internet, and everything related to big data, especially. So quite exciting.
Okay, welcome. To my right, Will Harris. You are really the founder of Channel Flip.
Yes. Yes, really.
In your CV, it often reads a serial entrepreneur, which sounds a bit like a serial killer.
Yeah, well, if serial is 2, I guess successive is better than serial.
Channel Flip is now the leading producer for web videos, basically, or online videos in the UK.
We are the leading producer in the UK of video that is made for YouTube. Our content gets about 100 million views a month.
And subscribers is the number?
About 25 million subscribers as of this morning.
So
might be a bit more by now.
And what connects to me, you've studied law in Oxford, so that was a misguided stint, as you say. So
yeah,
you found a way outside law.
Yeah, so escaped from the law bubble into the media, which is far nicer.
So being an entrepreneur, great escape from just being a lawyer. And next to you, David Lyle, who was a native of Sydney, and then moving.
I escaped also.
Escaped Sydney.
I was a geologist and a physicist, and then I escaped.
Well, and now at the end, by now you're leading National Geographic channels and moved all across the globe basically with the format business. Pearson Television back then Fremantle leading the development at Fremantle, then moved on to Fremantle Media, Fremantle North America, bringing the little show Idols to North America, producing the first 2 seasons, then moving on to Fox, and through Fox, who owns 50% of National Geographic?
70%. It's a 70-30 split between the Society and Fox in the United States. In National Geographic channels here in Germany and other parts of the world, there are other partnerships as well.
Well, and
Sorry, I should be accurate, I suppose.
well, yeah. Well, you being a geologist in the first place, I mean, it's ending up with National Geographic.
Same sort of thing, really. You're always exploring for some ore, some minerals.
I'm sure
that are.
there's a joke about a lot of old fossils in there somewhere.
Yeah, there is.
So today we will talk about the entertainment entrepreneur, and well, when you are at conferences, you hear it all the time. We heard it yesterday. And you pick it up from the room that television is dead, broadcasters are dead. Everyone but YouTube, obviously, is it? What we can surely say is that things are changing. The broadcast industry was pretty much a closed market with the broadcasters being gatekeepers and controlling the airtime. And that closed market with the emerging digital technologies isn't closed anymore. And that changes a lot. And obviously for broadcasters, it seems to be, that change seems to trigger some fear. What that change may mean, without looking too much ahead in the future, that's what we will discuss and debate today. And we will do so by giving a few quotes, and I will start with you two, and we've prepared 3 quotes for you, starting with the first, and hoping you have an opinion about that. So that is George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, recently saying at an inaugural speech they did at USC, "It's a mess, it's total chaos. It's because all the gatekeepers have been killed." Now, are you still a gatekeeper at National Geographic?
Yes, and as far as I can tell, I'm as alive as Lucas and Spielberg, who themselves are gatekeepers. They both run studios that fund production in television and in film, and digital too. So perhaps they were trying to summon up a spirit rather than be precise. Look, it is changing. There are different, there have always been different gatekeepers, and probably there are more gatekeepers than ever. And sadly, because, well, it's not sadly, inevitably, it's a commercial business. So the total gatekeeper is going to be who's got the money. Yeah. Broadcasters and even narrowcasters in the television landscape, in cable or pay, do have money to make content, and we do commission lots of content, hundreds of hours per year, and some of that content needs to be special so that it makes sense to be on TV. We're doing next year Cosmos, the reworking of the short series that was presented by Carl Sagan, and the last of the blue chip animal programming occurs on Nat Geo Wild. So when you want programming that is hugely expensive, you've got to look to a model that will support that. But it doesn't deny that there is plenty of activity and commercially viable activity for lower production costs and lower CPMs occurring online.
Yeah, I think really what George and Stephen are sort of getting at is the fact that it was the case that, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you were a producer and you wanted to reach 500,000, 1 million, 10 million people, the only way that you would be able to do that would be via a gatekeeper, via someone who owned a channel who could reach 10 million people, right? Whether that's Fox or ABC or whoever. I think the big difference now is that, regardless of the commercials and regardless of the production values, you can be a 17-year-old guy or girl sitting in your bedroom making videos with your webcam, and you can reach 1 million people or 2 million people. And that is a big difference. And it doesn't need to mean to say that they are commercially viable or not, or that they're high production values or not. The point is, you no longer need a gatekeeper to reach millions and millions of people worldwide. So I don't think it's that they're dead. I just think it's that for a certain class of producer or a certain type of content, they're increasingly irrelevant. We have, so Channel Flip as a company, we work with a lot of young producers who have grown up with YouTube, who are producing stuff for YouTube as the first and only platform that they go to. And they have between 10 to 15 million views a month from 2 to 3 million unique people from all around the globe. We have kids that make stuff out of their bedrooms that is watched by hundreds of thousands of people in Australia or Los Angeles. It's incredible. So I think even Stephen and George will know who are executive producers of the Neil Blomkamp film that's out right now. And Neil was, of course, became famous through a YouTube short that he did. So I think the gatekeepers are not dead, but they are ailing.
Well,
I think they work a different patch. Mm-hmm. If you've got a simple message, therefore it might suit YouTube, where most of the content tends to be in the 5 to 10 minute range. And the people who want to find that, they're hungry, I call them sort of followers for this material, and they work at finding it and work at keeping up to date with it. And that's what they get. If you want a more complicated story that's going to take an hour of your time or 2 hours of your time if it's a movie, perhaps, then you, as a viewer, as a consumer, will say you have to look elsewhere, I'd think. So I just think it's different portals for producers and different pathways for viewers.
So that's interesting, because I think that the point that you make quite rightly is that a lot of the content that is digital today, or is digital first, is very short form. And is often of a slightly lower production value. I think what we're seeing is that is changing quite rapidly as we see smart televisions becoming more and more prevalent. So we've seen in the last year, people watching YouTube on their televisions has gone from about 2% of our audience to about 10% of our audience. And that audience wants something different. They don't just want short form things that they can just click around for every 5 minutes. They don't, one of the great things about television, about the gatekeepers, is that you can sit down and somebody will sort of give you stuff for as long as you're watching. You can sit there for hours and somebody will program it for you. So we're seeing an increasing amount of that happening, where people want to sit down, they want to watch longer form things, and they want to sit there for hours and just watch YouTube on their television, which is an interesting question, because we think about gatekeepers as being channels or networks. And actually, as we go forward, we might be thinking about gatekeepers as being platforms. So, is YouTube a gatekeeper? Is the YouTube recommendations algorithm as important a scheduler and programmer as any TV channel? What about Netflix? The content that Netflix makes available or doesn't make available or recommends to you is just another form of gatekeeper.
Or Amazon.
Or Amazon. Yeah, if you liked this, you might also like. We've all had that. So I think that the mechanisms for gatekeeping are also changing quite a lot as we look into a world where I think in the UK 70% of homes will have internet connected to the television in the next 5 years. And that changes things quite a lot, I think.
But in the final analysis, just regardless of how big the gates are and who's keeping them, it's going to be money. Who's going to fund this production? If you want to self-fund in your bedroom, YouTube's for you. And you fund a lot of your web producers, so you've become a gatekeeper, a studio, if you will, and you have arrangements with products, so you're in the commercial business of commercial television, I'll call it, even if it's not appearing on traditional television. So to some extent, it's going to be, where's the money? I mean, it remains commercial television for a reason.
Yeah, show me the money is always the refrain that a lot of people get to about YouTube, which is often a very pertinent question. And I think there is an interesting question to be thought about when it comes to gatekeepers and when it comes to the amount of commercial value that can be extracted in different places. I think one of the great advantages that digital platforms have, and YouTube in particular, is that when it comes to justifying what you do to an advertiser, right? At the end of the day, whether it's appearing on YouTube, whether it's appearing on National Geographic, it is at some point funded by an advertiser. And the great thing about digital is that the amount of data that we have to be able to justify how many people are watching. When we have 1 million views on YouTube, we can see where they came from geographically, roughly how old the people were based on YouTube login data, whether they're male or female, how long they watched for, what they went on to watch after that. And this isn't sort of extrapolated data from a Nielsen rating, it's actual data from the actual people doing it. So I think at the moment we're living in a world where we have an established way that advertisers buy TV airtime and an established way that advertisers have a commercial relationship with program makers. And it's established, and therefore it's the majority way right now. But I think there is only so long that the old roots between brands and audiences can hold out in the face of what is clearly better audience data, more defined targeting, and better engagement statistics. I don't know how long it can be before making something for YouTube or making something for digital is as commercially viable as making it for a traditional TV channel.
I think I certainly am thrilled that at National Geographic Channel there's an Uber brand rather than just be the XYZ or Z channel. I think the all-purpose, all things to all people broadcaster is a more difficult concept. But even with that brand, people still watch shows. It's shows thereafter. And I think, again, the advertisers, if they need to hit a large number of people at a certain time, are still going to find a value in television. And it's somewhat traditional forms, but I do agree better metrics help, and I think with better connected televisions, that is, that same sort of metric that you're talking about will become part of the linear television landscape as well, and TV everywhere will become a much more widely distributed. I mean, in France now, that's the case, is it not?
Yeah, of course. It's I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, it's operator. We were talking about gatekeeper, but who has the gate deliverers here, really? Yeah. So operators, and Orange has been very active towards mobile television back in the 2000, and when we think about 15 million households that get broadband DSL delivered, and the number of fiber to home now available, which enables me to tell my kids who love Queen to say, hey, let's watch this YouTube video thanks to fiber in HD in my 5.1 system, and let's listen to Brian May, who's deciphering Bohemian Rhapsody, and that type of content I can find it because I know I'm looking after it, and I can pinpoint it, and it's part of that vast ocean of data that YouTube is, or Dailymotion, which we own, by the way, is part of this equation. On the other spectrum, yes, it's also about aggregating and delivering with the best quality as possible and the best user experience as possible to tablets, to TVs, to mobile. We just opened yesterday 300 cities in 4G, with the highest rate of 4G in France. So it's massive investments of operators which helped getting the best content produced by the most Uber brand on one side to the most unknown guy but is yet to be famous to the end user. So I think it's an ecosystem here we are talking about.
And I think If we go from gates and gatekeeping, it then becomes part of windows. And so people having exclusivity in one form, like linear TV, and then looking for different windows where something might go to a Netflix or an Amazon or a Hulu or whomever. I think it makes it somewhat more chaotic. I grant you that. But it just needs more management. And in fact, may be useful for the producers, I think, because I think producers willing to become their own studio, if you will, deficiting to some extent, can then invest and play all those windows and talk to a lot of gatekeepers and can really see the totality of the return on their product rather than perhaps putting something with a distributor and waiting for that mythical back end to appear.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because, as you say, the ability to for producers to go and go different routes and go to different audiences and even do it simultaneously with TV or do it in different windows, I think it is. One of the things that the internet is very good at is helping people find very niche content, or allowing you as somebody that really likes, German vintage 1960s cars, to find the person producing content who is producing just about, German vintage 1960s cars. The internet's very good at making those connections. What television is still incredibly good at, is assembling 10 million people on a Saturday night to watch American Idol. So if you are Coke, there is no more efficient way to reach your very, very broad audience than actually still to buy a bloody great TV spot on the most popular TV show on television. So I think where the internet has still got a long way to go to match, commercially television is not just to be great at connecting niche audiences, but to be able to deliver really broad audiences as well. I mean, for example, a lot of I know we'll talk a little bit about audience later, but one of the main audiences on YouTube is really a younger audience. If you want to reach people over 45 minutes, it's over 45 years old, it's a tough gig.
Yeah, well, it seems to me, listening to it, it's like, sometimes talking about windows, it's, trying to have scarcity, but giving it out to everyone at the same time. Basically, either narrowing down or even killing the windows is an abundance. And it seems to be hard to find a balance between both. But with more competitors and more screens, that's the next thing we want to touch on. The next quote is it if there is a fight on all those screens with all those competitors for audience attention, is the human being really made to give attention to so many stuff at the same time? And if he doesn't, what does that actually eventually mean for the business? The quote is from Jason Silver, and maybe we play, because he's on one of David's shows on National Geographic. You can see who he is.
Brain Games is game, and you are the player, created by our brains for your brain. Because despite those 120 billion beautiful neurons, my friends, your brain can still be quite simple. With puzzles and illusions that will challenge and amaze you, Brain Games is a television show whereby your senses and your brain are engaged and immersed. Brain Games is a ride, an experiment, fire drill for your mind. It's only on National Geographic, so switch it on and play.
So that's who he is, and as probably my parents would say, attention is a spotlight that can only be on one thing. and you're not multitasking, you're just unconcentrated. What do you think that means for television, who was just the one screen in the living room once?
Well, yeah, it's changed. By the way, it had Monday, April. That was in the United States. It's actually starting in Germany. I think it's the 12th, and in other parts of Europe on the 20th of this month. It's interesting that Jason, we found online, he doesn't have his own channel, but he'd been very successful at a number of TED conferences. And so when we wanted to do a show about the brain, and part of it about the ability for our brain to actually to fool us, and that's what the show's about, the limitations of our understanding. He was a perfect guy for it. And I think now we see second screen in the United States is certainly is alive and well. And some people would say, oh yes, the second screen is actually the television. The first screen is people tweeting, is people answering emails. We haven't really seen that second screen experience that something made and produced to accompany the program has been very successful in the States. And I'm not sure that that's not a fantasy.
Well, I think it's still a work in progress, because if you think about the multitasking habits that has raised across the world, I mean, I've been discussing with Sinla Weibo in China, where TV and talking about TV through a social network is even more advanced than Twitter, which was almost a shock, but it was true. Twitter obviously has a strong strategy towards TV. The former head of production company like Endemol is part of the Twitter team now. So in local headquarters, for instance, so you can see both a trend of industry, but also which is linked to a growth in usage, and this growth of usage has been obviously kicked off by big events like Super Bowl 2 years ago, and then moved to many shows in the UK, in France. Of course, we can think about The Voice or all those very, very big shows where they had the luxury of creating, like in France, they're creating an application which, so there are 4 coaches, obviously. For judges, they created a 5th coach, which was the voice of the public, and people could, play with that. There has been many experiments also, and to be honest, it's still, we know it's going to change a lot of things, especially in the business area and in the usage area. There are still a lot of ways we think we could monetize it. Not everything is related. There are low attention programming and high attention programming. How do you deal with those two types of programs? But at least there is a change, and it's by keeping on working with maybe the startups or the entrepreneurship, the people who create programs inside companies, that maybe there is a strong business model which is going to raise, I guess. But it's still pending.
Yeah, I think I probably would slightly tend to agree with you and disagree, David. I think the point of the sorry, the point of the second screen always for me is that you're watching TV and you want to be doing something else as well. Yeah. I don't want the same thing as I'm watching on TV. Like, I don't want to be following along with the game. I don't want to be, doing something related to the TV on my second screen. I want to be messaging my friends, or looking up on Facebook, or doing something complete.
IMDb to find out who the hell that person is.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't really buy into the idea that the second screen is great for being an additive experience to TV. I think there is the question of, you want to be doing something completely different. I like the idea though of high attention TV and low attention TV. There's something like Homeland, which is very high attention TV. I'm clearly not going to be doing anything apart from biting my nails during watching Homeland.
And trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, there's no hope of that. But during low attention TV, even like sort of sports going on in the background, or reality TV, although we all mess with reality TV. That's much easier to see, the second screen sort of usage. But even then, I'm not sure I buy into the idea of high attention and low attention TV so much as high attention and low attention viewers, right? Because there are some people, there are some things that are going to be on TV where I'm really not that bothered and I'm just, fiddling with the phone. And some people who are going to be so obsessed by that. I mean, the Kardashians is going to be my favorite example of that today. There are people who will watch the Kardashians religiously, and the idea of doing something else whilst watching the Kardashians is completely crazy.
So it's interesting, isn't it, related to how the shows are written and produced? I mean, are they thought in mind with second screen up front, or is second screen just an add-on? Suddenly you think, okay, it's fair enough, but I mean, I could play a game. Huh?
Look, I don't deny that it's something that needs to develop, and where there is that desire for the audience to be interactive, and maybe that's as you design the show, then they will. I mean, with our brain games, for instance, it could have been a very standard documentary about the neurobiology of the brain, but we called it brain games, and it's one of those rare occasions that the host actually looks at the camera and speaks to the viewer and says, have a look behind me. Is it the one on the left or is it the one on the right? Oh, you probably think it's the one on the left because your brain does this or does that. So that's a show that has been designed to be interactive. And we have looked in the second season for second screen experiences, but to make them more so that the person can play them in a sort of Facebooky social media way. And look, I agree.
That's true. And also, when you're in front of your TV, the first thing you do is, or one of the things you do often is to change channels, right? So suddenly, there is no such thing as a switch between production apps, or yet to be imagined by Apple or Twitter or whoever. But ideally, a suite of apps should follow you as you watch TV and as you switch channels, because of course, it takes a lot of energy to create digital proposition for one show, and then when it's over, you're not. I mean, this attention we were talking about is lost for the next season almost, until the app regenerates itself. So, I mean, it's a lot of also issues or complexities that is brought by app stores in a way, and production. So maybe we need to think with perspective on how the user could leverage those applications, and whether there would be any solution as an industry. Maybe.
Can I say something on that?
Sure.
Been creating TV formats for many years. It has been discussions about doing this interactive part of a show. Some broadcasters, the gatekeepers, 10 years ago, they said you are not allowed to come to the pitch if you don't have interactive pitch as well. And then they never wanted it. And then you are sitting there and creating a show. You don't know if it's going to be aired live. You have no idea what's going to happen and what time slot. And it's very, very difficult to blend in interactive elements. And as a viewer, do you actually care about what the other viewers are doing at the same time? Maybe you want to tweet with you want to have a conversation going on with your friends about what you see on Idols, but you don't want to see in the TV show, but you don't want to see the other viewers interfering with your experience. And it's very old, and the interactivity is very old-fashioned. It's more or less about voting, who's going to win. You have a couple of judges, and then you are voting.
Discovery have taken with some of their programs. They will as a lower third, run tweets that may or may not have been real.
CNN does that all the time, right? It's tweet us your opinions. Like, I don't give a what somebody at home thinks about the news on CNN. You're paying for the opinion of the CNN anchor. So I think this gentleman had a question, actually.
Just to extend that point you were making, how long until How long until the actual advertising revenue will, take notice of what people are actually doing whilst watching the show, whilst watching on the second screen? What they're actually doing will have an effect sooner or later, I'm quite sure, on how much money you generate.
Yeah, I think we're already starting to see, we do a lot of advertising campaigns around our content that lives on YouTube, and we're already doing a lot of work to measure the social engagement that goes on around the programming, and using that as a way to either kick up the amount of money that we're charging, or brands are coming back the other way and actually saying, actually that campaign, that advertising series you did for us didn't have as much engagement as the last one. We don't really want to pay as much money for it, right? So we're starting to think about advertising not in terms of the eyeballs that you're hitting randomly, but actually in terms of the types of social engagements that it generates. But I think that comes back to the sort of wider premise of the question, really, which is we have so many draws on our attention now. TV is not the major way that we're entertaining ourselves. And I think this is a pretty big shift from over the last 10 years. It's not just, I go home and I want to watch TV. It's video games, it's Facebook, it's iPhone apps. There are so many different draws on your attention that maybe the best you can hope for is to be doing 2 at once and not 3 or 4 at once, right?
Well, we have got to that stage because what has happened over the last decade, interestingly enough, as more and more online usage went up, TV usage also went up. And so it was extraordinary. So where are these people getting the time? And we've now got to the point that if you allow people 8 hours to sleep, there just isn't any more time, as this quote would attest to. And so the second screen experience is a necessity. And I dare say if you walk around offices, as CEO, I have occasion to do so, and notice all the people closing their Facebook pages as I walk past. It seems, and the middle of the day, I think you'll find, is a very happy spike in most offices for a lot of your material, I feel sure, especially down the comedy spectrum.
Yeah. So, it's interesting to think that, do you know the average, I think I read, but I might be getting this completely wrong, that the average person spends 4 hours a day watching television still in the United States. And 4 hours a day, every day, seems like an awful lot of television.
Well, there are a lot of people, and there are some channels that benefit from being left on. They're just on. ID channel.
So you have to have a second experience if you're 4 hours on telly.
Yeah.
You can only live your life with a second experience.
Well, one of the astounding things for people who watch material on smartphones, for instance, it was always thought at the beginning of that capability that these would be commuters watching sports headlines. That was the people on trains. The majority is watched in the home where there is a television, and people are watching long form material. So again, it's like one of those great propositions that everyone just knew was right, and it turns out to be totally and absolutely wrong. When I was looking into interactive television, how you could make people pay for interactivity with their television, I just started from the point that was so obvious that the only way you'd make people pay to be interactive is if they could win something. So that was totally obvious. And then a year later along came Idol. And of course, people in most countries of the world pay to be interactive with the television out of altruism because they want that girl to win. So again, it was just one of those so obvious starting points that was absolutely motherless wrong. So we live and learn.
Mobile is personal. I think we saw it when there were so many phone calls from the households, and it translates into also the digital experience afterwards. So something to thought about.
Will and I came here today, and Anna and we were in the cab, and we saw a woman pedaling by, perfectly upright, on a bike, texting with both hands on a smartphone as she sailed through the green light, which was fortunately green, I thought. But she was quite happily sailing along, and I suppose in another year she'll be watching something something dramatic.
I'd like to pick on the the low attention and high attention TV, and what came to my mind listening to you, does any creator of programs deliberately create a low attention television program? I mean, that's what it may result to be, but you don't go to a broadcaster and pitch, this is a low attention television format. Which is,
like salt or
but
sugar.
you can go broad and you can choose to go narrow.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be more deep and less broad.
Less distracted.
Yeah. And one other thing that is very interesting is if you check your own habits when you want to have the latest news. We had, for example, President Obama visiting Sweden last week, and I didn't watch television to see what happened when he was there. The first thing I did was to check one of the daily newspapers, what they had been reporting. And then I went into the Minister of Foreign Affairs, his tweet, and read his comments. And then I checked some stuff on Facebook. And then late night I watched some material on CNN because I wanted to see how they reported his visit in Sweden. They thought he were in Holland on his way to to Russia, but it was really interesting. If a major event happens in your country, I'm not sure that people in this room will immediately turn on the television to see, because it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
But I think it's fascinating that you went to newspapers, because that would not seem to be the naturally occurring path.
Television on the newspapers. Their TV.
Their web.
Their web TV. Yeah.
Well, moving on to the next quote, obviously from someone who probably would never say that he creates low attention television, Ricky Gervais. And that comes close. It's on creative freedom. And it basically says to create, get final edit, and be the broadcaster is the ultimate artistic experience. Now, when you pick on what you said earlier, when you can be your own channel, does the new world maybe empower the creative and the program maker? Maybe weaken the broadcaster, but is that a power shift that you would see?
Yeah, I think so. So we produce a lot of content for the web, and we worked with Ricky Gervais to launch his YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Ricky Gervais, if you want to go and check it out. And one of the reasons that he was really interested in doing it, and in fact we work with a lot of British talent, and one of the reasons that they're always interested in doing it is because they feel that on the web they can have creative freedom. The number of meetings that you go into with big talent, whether particularly in the UK, and the opening refrain, the opening thing is, I'm really annoyed with stupid broadcasters and their stupid commissioners, and they don't know what I want to make, and they don't know what I want, and I just want to make what I want and tell them to shove it. Right, and that is the mostly because generally the people who are commissioning are now younger than they are, and there's a little bit of bitterness there as well, I think. And so I think
we call it biting the hand that feeds.
Yeah. So I think the ability for talent to go on, make their own things, be their own broadcaster, is incredibly powerful. I think it comes with a caveat, which is that for established talent, it tends to work best if you are already famous. And of course, the catch there is, how are you going to be famous? And the answer is television. Ricky Gervais launched his channel with us back in March, and it went from 0 to 250,000 subscribers in about 6 weeks. And it was the fastest ever growing YouTube channel that we'd ever had. And it was one of the fastest, I think, in YouTube in all of this year. It was an incredible success. But the reason that it grew so quickly, so fast, was because Ricky had over 1.5 million followers on Twitter. And so every day he was tweeting, I've put something new on my YouTube channel, go and watch it. I've put this new thing up on my YouTube channel, go and watch it. And of course, he's had a 1.5 million Twitter followers because he's massively famous. So I think there is an awful lot of appeal for talent to be their own broadcaster, do their own thing, have their own, have 100% creative control over what they do. But with the caveat that you've got to be big enough to generate an audience to start with. I think the second, as much as I agree with that premise, the second problem is that eventually you have to work out, unless you are literally as a piece of talent, unless you're going to do it for free, you have to work out how you're going to make some money out of it. And the chances are you're going to make some money by advertising. And as soon as you get an advertiser involved, you lose 100% creative control. You might only be down to 99% creative control or 98% creative control. But you have then lost that complete independence. And so we spend a lot of time working with creators who come to us and say, I want to be my own broadcaster. I want to make everything that I want to do. And I want to get paid for it. To which my response will always be, okay, you can probably do 80% of what you want to do or 90% of what you want to do, which still might be double what television gives you, but it's not going to be 100%. Because being a broadcaster means having responsibilities to your advertisers.
And oddly enough, in the United States, a colleague of mine, John Landgraf at FX, approached Louis C.K., the comedian, and the deal was simply this. Either we pay you a lot of money to make this show, in which case we'll give you notes, we will look at the cuts, we will own the distribution, of which you'll get a back end, but we'll control that, or we'll pay you less money and a car will pull up on a certain date and throw a tape out the window, we'll catch it and put it to air. And Louis took the second option. I'd prefer to be paid less money and have total artistic control.
Which he then put out on the web, right?
Yeah, and he's now looking at his second windows and so forth. So, there are certainly different models. But even with that, if you accept the money, you're expected to do something for it, is the sad truth of commercial television.
Just spinning that on, I mean, the thing that quote doesn't answer basically is, well, broadcasters have been curators in a way, and they funded the program making in the first place, which is the big open question: who pays?
Yeah, and took the risk.
That answers the distribution, but who pays in the first place for creative development and production?
Well, and that takes us back to the gates and the gatekeepers, and then the windows, and how you earn different amounts at different time. And if the artist wants to take the risk, then yes, they can minimize, but never. I agree with Will. They'll never do away. If you get paid, you have to do something for the payee.
What's your taking on that? What's your take on Netflix now becoming a commissioner of original programming?
I think they have a most marvelous publicity machine, Netflix. The way they tell it, first of all, everything they commission is a hit. As far as I can see it, that's 4,000 years of entertainment history gone out the window. They're the first people to be able to defy gravity, because everything they do is a hit. Mind you, they don't release any figures that would justify that. The figures they do release, oddly enough, that they made last quarter, 29 million on 1.1 billion revenue, which is less than 3% return on investment. But their share price keeps going up, so you can fool a lot of the people a lot of the time. Look, I think they're a fine, it's a business, but I don't think they're the end of television as we know it. I think they're just, as with Amazon or Hulu or something else, they have subscribers and they've got material that they want, but they're having a dream run in the press.
Well, bizarrely, Netflix is not so much the end of television as we know it, so much as television all over again. I mean, Netflix starts to look more and more like a traditional TV business
HBO,
every single day. It's incredible. What started off as a platform for renting DVDs now starts to look like HBO. So I think far from being the end of television, it's a bit more like television again. And YouTube arguably is the same. YouTube started off as a very disruptive business that's doing, allowing people in their bedrooms to upload things, allowing us all to watch cats playing piano and dogs riding skateboards, right? It's an incredibly disruptive, wonderful thing. All the new people that are being hired into YouTube are media execs who have come from television, and they're doing distribution deals with big studios and windowing new releases and giving advances against advertising revenue to commission hours of new programming that's exclusive to the platform but maybe windowed somewhere else. Like, all these platforms start to look more and more and more like traditional television every single day. And
especially when they have 30-second commercials, which they won't allow you to skip. So again, different.
It's not even as good as TiVo.
Yes, I know. So in some respects, they have reinvented the television model. And I mean, in all our discussions, we've really got to be aware of where advertisers are going to put money, because there can be subscription fees, and Netflix do that. But for most of the other platforms, formats, styles of television, production of television, risk-taking, somewhere in that mix is advertising, if it's commercial TV.
Well, if you ask me, it will be a high-attention experience. They will put money.
Obviously, it's a business model that works.
Yeah. Still works.
Yeah.
Still works. The television experience.
Just finding new windows and new distribution, but it's the consumer behavior that has changed, and you had to adapt to that.
Yeah.
But the business model, advertising, reaching consumers is still the same, and consumers wants to have good quality of content.
And they want to have what they want when they want. Yeah. That's undeniable, that they don't want to live in a world where it's determined by someone else. So they do want to dip into a world where they come home and turn on a channel and go, oh, great, now I'll make dinner and have a drink and sit down and watch what someone else is going to choose for me. But then at other times, it's not. It's like, oh, now I want to see what I recorded last night, or while I was watching this, I recorded that. Or, I mean, probably the greatest change in the last 2 years, and Netflix has certainly been part of it, is binge viewing. That it's become now socially acceptable and well practiced to devote a weekend to watching every episode of Breaking Bad, or to watch every episode of Downton Abbey, or whatever it is, but to really just binge on something. And it changed the launch of the TV season this time last year was in the United States, where they make a great to-do of all the new programs, and they're all coming out. No one could figure out what the hell was happening, because everything was being recorded. No one was watching anything, and then all of a sudden, within about 2 or 3 weeks, and people started watching what they'd been recording, but they thought, oh, I'll just get 2 or 3 episodes and find out from my friends whether it's worthwhile watching.
Well, I think just then to bring it back all the way around to sort of where we started, talking about the sort of the talent being the broadcasters, we've just started doing, so Ricky Gervais obviously been producing this great content for his channel. He's really loving having this huge audience that he can go out to. He is now starting to curate his favorite things from YouTube and from his friends and from other people on the platform into playlists and into little things that every Friday you can go and watch. Scheduling it, right? So Ricky Gervais is the new scheduler and programmer of his channel. So I think if we're coming back to the idea
waiting until he commissions.
Yeah. I'm sure that won't be far off, actually. So there we go.
I'd like to move on to the next quote, and looking at Anna. It's on entrepreneurship, even though I made you the founder of Strix wrongly. And since we talked about making television programs, I would like to give it a bit more of a focus. looking at making something new, be it a business or a new show, and connecting it to the idea of big data, which always assumes that it all is so predictable. And is it really so predictable, or is it the good old game of trying to create something new? You said earlier that that's probably you don't think too much of an interference when you create something in the first place.
No, I don't think you can have too many restrictions when you start to create something, and also when you are founding companies. Being an entrepreneur in this media industry, for me, the only drive has been to create the content I want to see myself or that I'm interested in. So this is really good news, what I'm hearing here now, and all this possibility to find distribution without being had to go to the gatekeepers. But it has taken too long time.
Too long.
And Ricky Gervais and other people who are doing it now, they are the future entrepreneurs in the media. And also the young guys who are doing their own shows back at in their bedrooms. And you know, for me, I hope my dream will come true soon, so I will be able to run a production company without being had to go up and talk to 4 people.
Yeah.
And be dependent on their budgets. So I would rather go to an advertiser and create something together with an advertiser and not losing the freedom, because they are not that spoiled. They have difficulties when they are dealing with broadcasters. Probably it's much easier for them to deal with directly with content producers sometimes. I have some examples of that. But we still need distribution, and we still need the possibility to reach audiences that are big enough.
But you're happy that the broadcaster is not the only bank in town anymore.
And maybe we can find models like the film studios in Hollywood that you find. You go in with venture capital. Then you create a great show, and then you find funding for it. And then we can go to you, and we can go to commercial broadcasters, or just have it non-exclusive.
That, back to the first quote on the George Lucas quote, funnily he continued saying, which we hadn't got on screen, that you only need to reach an audience of 1 million. Which
depends on which country you are.
Depends on which country you are. And obviously, for George Lucas, that's an only. But he basically said that the business of the big studios is so much on the blockbuster that they basically have to have that huge machine. And when you don't have to rely on that anymore, maybe even a smaller audience can make a margin in actually still doing a business.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about production budgets, but one of the great costs that goes up is marketing. And I mean, that's what the blockbuster movies are finding. It's not just the cost of making the movie that makes it a risky business, but marketing. And as we talk about a disrupted world and fragmentation, which is really what we've been talking about, I mean, one of the great problems is how do you reach enough, in my case, a broad audience who are going to sample something, but then in other cases to find that niche audience that might be interested in 1960s German cars. You know, how do you let those people know you've spent the money producing the damn thing?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, you know, and clearly we're experiencing that right now, if you look at the last season of Hollywood blockbusters, it's a summer full of blockbusters that have absolutely tanked. You know, the big Tom Cruise vehicle completely died. The big Will Smith vehicle completely died. The big James Franco vehicle completely died. And I think we're finding, as you say quite rightly, that marketing these things is becoming incredibly hard. Not just to reach the people, but because we have, you know, going back to what we were saying earlier, the attention is so, our attention is everywhere and is so scarce that actually, as you say, finding those people is becoming more and more and more expensive. I think for an entrepreneur and for somebody in the production business right now, finding alternate ways of financing what it is they do has to be one of the most crucial things over the next 5 years, because from my experience of it or understanding of it, traditional broadcaster or channel budgets are only going down, and the amount of minutes and the amount of access required seems to be going up mostly. So creatively financing things, I think, is really important.
Right. Don't you think you need to have something so much of a quality and so surprising, then you go through that viral effect, and most of the people who are not at the short tail of this talent pool, let's say, have difficulties just doing business even in the digital world. I mean, producing a serious app, translating it correctly towards several platforms, Android, iPhones, doing something on the web which is not a copycat, or doing a mobile version which is not a duplicate of what you're doing, but as we said, is mobile, is personal, is on the go, is a very hard work, requires a lot of talent, and there are many people here that can better talk about that, as I'm more into the entrepreneurship part of this world than true entrepreneurs, I would say. But then the journey begins. I mean, then you need to make yourself known in an app store, or knock on the doors of big brands to get distribution or marketing, and I totally agree. And the cost of acquisition, even in a digital space, is huge, through various app stores mechanism, through Apple tools, Twitter. I mean, yes, you may have notoriety. How does it transform into downloads? And then monthly user or daily active users is another challenge then. And how do you retain those users? So, I mean, there is what I want to say is the production, whether it's in traditional broadcast or in digital, is a massive amount of work, requires talent and quality, but then the journey just begins, I guess.
Anna, have you used that model where you've taken venture money and produced the program before you've gone to broadcasters or different windows?
This far, I have only done it together with broadcasters, because that's the only way to get enough distribution or a promise of
to get that
to
initial
the advertisers. So I have been funding up to 80% of TV. 80.
80.
Yeah, 80 for some of the shows. And for example, also talking about independence, one of our latest formats, it's called Familie. It's about locally produced food. It's farmers competing in who is producing the best product, and also in a very eco-friendly way. And we do it together with one of the big Swedish energy companies and with a bank, who are very much funding farms and forests companies. And the only thing they get is that they have 2 jury members in the show. Mm-hmm. And since we had only 20% funding when we started the production, but we were quite sure, since it was the major broadcaster, that we would be able to find sponsors. And then also we own 100% of the rights. I even own the TV programs themselves. Normally the broadcaster always keeps the rights to the program. And we have now this far sold 60 episodes to France and 10 episodes to Denmark, and also optioned it to Australia and Canada. So it's quite a good deal, but it was a risk and very, very hard work for me personally to find that money. And sometimes I just felt it's not worth it. I'd rather have someone paying me up front next time.
Well, at least you got the 20%. Did you get 100% of the sponsorship from the bank, or did you have to share that with the broadcaster?
Yeah, so the broadcaster don't even know how much they paid us.
Okay.
So that's quite okay.
Why should they? They just get a broadcast license. It's not I mean, that is a huge thing.
Reasons they may wish to.
That is a huge thing in Germany, the negotiation of the terms of trade, how they phrase it, independent production companies trying to hold on to rights in the primary rights deal. Looking at the raw model in the UK, Ofcom intervening and basically saying independent production companies should at least hold on to the format rights, but maybe even more. The whole thing of 7-day catch-up comes from, even the creation of the right 7-day catch-up comes from that Ofcom.
In this case, I was at least had to check with the AFP department at the channel what they normally charge for the billboards. Yeah. So we didn't dump the price. But then on the other hand, I think we got double what they normally get for a billboard. And it doesn't happen that often that the broadcaster allow a producer to sell the billboards.
Would you say that for being an independent production company, that is the way into the future, having a stock of rights that you own?
Yeah,
just taking Fremantle as an example, who used to phrase themselves in company presentations as a multinational production company, and now they say they are a rights exploitation company, which seems to be a different understanding of their business.
I think all TV producers and content producers want to be right holders because that's where the money is.
That's where the money
is. And that builds up their permanent value, if you will. Yeah. Every company that has owned Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, when they sell themselves, and the companies have, from Celador to the Dutch company, what was it, Two-Way Traffic, and then iWorks. Every time they sell it, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the rights are estimated to be 100 million US.
Yeah, because the people go away anywhere, so you can't pay for them. So the rights is the only value.
Yes.
But still, I know production companies in Sweden who has been in the business for 20 years and they have this far never sold any of their shows as a format abroad. And if you read their annual reports, they say they have a lot of formats. So it's very, very difficult, and it's like 1 out of 100. You know that too. Yeah. That really.
There are not so many that travel.
But then they travel. It's very, very good. I've sometimes made some calculations on Millionaire and Survivor, for example. Survivor, of course, since I produced it in many countries and I didn't hold the rights myself, I was just sometimes making the calculation on how much Charlie Parsons got in license fee and not being had to work for the rest of his life on just one show.
But as I always say about the format business, it's money while you sleep.
Yeah. And they don't want you to come and tell them how to produce the show. But now when I sold this show to France, the worst thing that could happen to Shine in France would be that I came there and told them how to produce it. So they rather put money into your bank account and stay away. And,
in my format experience, pretty well all countries in the world are the same, with the exception of France. So it's just, you just shake your head and take the money.
Yeah.
Well, even holding back rights made production companies or at least that's the thing. Some production companies don't want to be too entrepreneurial. They just want to take the money and produce, whilst others want to have an entrepreneurial business that with at least the hope that it will scale.
Anna's the poster child of why you should be entrepreneurial.
That is,
You took the risk. You set sail with only 20% of the budget in your pocket, and now you reap the reward.
Yeah.
We should talk about the US rights too.
Yes. Very, very good. I got Food Network asking for it, but
I don't mind having that conversation.
That's one for offline.
So I move on to the next quote, and just skip one. Take on the last one because I think that fits better. Kevin Spacey. I think that was during the McTaggart lecture, where he basically say, well, the differentiation between platforms will fall away. At at the end of the day, it doesn't mind where you're watching what. It's all content, it's all story. And going back to you, if you even own the rights to the content, that could probably make you the powerful player.
1.5 years ago, I met Kevin Riley, who is still president of Fox.
FBC, Fox Broadcasting.
Yeah, and he said he was 2 years ago. He said he was really depressed because he didn't know what's going to happen with all the channels and networks. And then he found out that as long as the shows, the TV formats and the programs are branded with Fox, he doesn't care where it's aired. And for my kids, my son, he watch Family Guy every day. And if I ask him what network he's watching, he has no idea. He's just watching Family Guy. And you can also see there is one channel now in Sweden, TV3, that is doing really, really bad. But they have 4 titles that works extremely well still. So they got like 500,000. And it's 4 old titles that they have had for at least 10 years. So there you see how people really go in and they watch just these 4 programs, but then they are not at all interested in seeing what else is going on this network, because they lost the confidence in the channel
in the
as curator.
a curator. Yeah. That's a very interesting take, I think, because to connect it with Ricky Gervais and this guy, the talent is the brand and the show is the brand, but it's not the broadcaster anymore who is necessarily the brand that people search out to.
Yeah, I think
except National Geographic.
No. There are many other branded channels, most of them cable or satellite channels. I mean, by definition, the broadcasters are broad, and they find that's why there's such a struggle for sports, because sports is a great magnet, and from that, then you try and launch these other programs on broadcasters. But I think some people want curated viewing to watch the channel, but I agree thoroughly that it's the shows that become the stars.
And it can also be people who are the curators. If I read a review of a guy who I'm reading his music reviews every week on the internet, and I know exactly what kind of music I'm going to hear. And you need these kind of curators. And you said that Ricky Gervais is putting up shows from other people that he likes. And so, but Channel 4 or ITV or so is not that important anymore.
Look, it's still, on their behalf, it still does have a real value. And sadly, the people at TV3 must be doing a shocking job if they've got 3 shows that do work and they can't launch, or 4 shows that do work and they can't launch off the back of them. I still think broadcasters have a place, and it's harder, and Kevin Riley is right that if that material goes on lots of platforms, it's okay. But as this all presupposes one thing, which is that the internet pipes remain free. And that's been the rule. But will they? At the moment, there are powerful lobby groups that make sure that they do. But should that ever change?
At least what I can say is when we provide, fiber to home, like 200, 300 megabit for something like between 30 and 40 euros per month, it's an enormous investment to be at this level of quality across that many households and mass market. I mean, when we're talking about millions and millions of users of our networks. So that's one fact. And at the same time, I think what we see on the telecommunication industry is similar to what has been seen in other industries, whether it's retail, whether it's music industry, what's happening in the TV and broadcast industry. My view is that there is a digital wave, a tidal wave, I would say, that is hitting the shores of the traditional businesses. And when this tidal wave goes away, the usage have changed, the business models have changed, the gatekeepers are some new kids on the block, I would say. And what's very important is to try to understand from smoke signals, from the Lime, and what's happening outside of our traditional businesses to be able to react to that wave. So I think it's also very important to be in an open innovation mode and try to open, and that's what we're trying to achieve. And a telco can be very rigid. There's no problem. It's finance. It's network. It's so be the bridge between those key assets and core networks on one side, or produce content or broadcasting rights on one side, and what's happening on that tidal wave to try and understand where the new era is coming. So just trying to give my voice to the future.
I've been listening to Zako Tuomin at the Entertainment Masterclass this morning, and he basically said, change, in his view, change will not happen silently and slowly. He said it will be like an earthquake, and there will be a riot. Is that
looking forward?
Well, it's brutal. I can say there are brutal things happening in the core business and in the digital world, and it's silent for a lot of people, and it's well known for others. So you need to know where to watch. There is a fragmentation issue there too. But there are businesses that are changing. And if you look at what, for instance, music industry, how music industry has changed, we can learn from the past also to better create the future, maybe.
Who knows?
I think just to then sort of finish off with your earthquake analogy, right? The things that survive during an earthquake are the things that have got incredible foundations and incredibly strong structures. And I think as we go into a future where, wherever they're watching it, whether it's on an iPad or a television, whether it's on catch-up, whether it's on live TV, or whether it's on a phone, wherever it is, the things that people will seek out are the things that have strong brands that they identify with. And that brand might be a personality like Ricky Gervais. It might be a show like Deadliest Catch. It might be a channel brand like Nat Geo, right? The things that are going to survive is that wherever people want to watch, they're going to seek out the things that they know and love, and that's going to be the brands.
That's so true. That's so true.
To take that earthquake analogy further, having lived in Los Angeles for 10 years, you're right that you need strong foundations, but if you look at the houses built there, they also need to be extremely flexible. They're all built of timber. Very few brick structures in LA, homes, and hence I think that analogy flows through that as there's fragmentation and disruption, we all need to be very flexible with the deals we do, with the shows we make, with the people that we are serving, and how we serve up our material to them as they make different lifestyle decisions, really, it becomes.
Well, any questions? We have 5 minutes to go. That's what I see in the back. So you have the possibility to ask any question you wish.
Yes, I have one question. You were talking about how things are going to be financed, and if you look at the movie business, crowdfunding has started to be a really big role there. Zach Braff has done this, and for Veronica Mars, they are doing a movie now as well. And do you see any chance that there might be a group of fans that will finance an entire TV show in the future, if that is a possibility?
Well, you've been...
I think absolutely that is the case. So we just came off the back of, a few months ago, we crowdfunded a feature film, albeit at a much smaller level, about $150,000. But using, the main attraction for that for the crowdfunding was the main talent, and the main talent was the guy that everybody wanted to see. I think it's an interesting balance because, Zach Braff managed to raise a lot of money kickstarting because, he specifically said, I want to retain creative control and do it outside of the studio system. Veronica Mars managed to raise the money for crowdfunding specifically because they couldn't get it away anymore on television. I think we saw an awfully big backlash when you get big companies coming in and effectively sort of subsidizing their operational risk with crowdfunding, right? So I think there is definitely the possibility where in the future you will crowdfund an entire series. Because, let's face it, for Veronica Mars raised whatever it was, $2 or $3 million, you can very easily make a high-grade, 10 or 15 ep series for $2 or $3 million. You just need the talent attached to it to gen up the fan base to get, I'm sure if Joss Whedon came up tomorrow and said, we're going to crowdfund a new series of Firefly, you would raise $5 million tomorrow, right? There's no problem. But where the difficulty comes, I think, is in big companies, Warner or Fox or Discovery, effectively trying to subsidize their risk with crowdfunding. I think we've seen that people are not so keen on that. So independent games publishers, for example, do very well on crowdfunding platforms. Big game publishers like EA, when they've tried to do it in the past, completely fail because everybody thinks, well, I'll support the person wanting to do the thing that they love, but I'm not going to support the man.
And to add to that, there is an interesting legal twist to it because it's try to draw a line between crowdfunding and crowd investment. Mm-hmm. If you want to look for the bigger money, the bigger budget, you are tempted to give the ones who give funding a profit share. But if you do so, you get into deep legal problems because you're somehow behaving like the stock market, but only in program making. And there still is no resolution how the regulator would answer that.
I think in the US, maybe from next year, you're going to be able to do that, to actually do crowdfunded investing.
Yes. No, they're trying to do exactly that, but it's like a forefront to see how
that would be incredible.
If that works, that could be a game changer in at least film financing.
And the sharing economy is a massive trend. Part of it being crowdfunding. I mean, when you see how a lot, as I said, of businesses have used it. I mean, whether it's hotel and Airbnb, whether it's Indiegogos and Kickstarter platforms, as we say, or whether it's BlaBlaCar or everything where people have some natural some resource and want to share it. It's a major trend, I believe.
Could also be very interesting with co-creating. Yeah. For example, if you want to have a new logo or a new business card, you can just go out and you can get 100 suggestions and you pick one and you pay $50 or something. Why don't doing that with post-production, for example, or...
I think that's interesting. I think TV creators always love the idea
Creative Commons. You could have a kind of a Creative Commons post-production.
But that only needs to pay. Yeah, but also that only has a limited value, right? It's interesting. People, entrepreneurs will always say, I love the idea of having 100 people designing my business card, and I just pick the one I pay. But if you get a TV channel to say, okay, you make 100 programs, and I'm just going to pick the one that I like the best to pay, somehow that doesn't work, right? So everyone has their own business.
We will see. I think that will work. If YouTube go out and ask people, you create a TV show, 10 minutes, and the one who wins get a whole series commissioned.
Well, Avi Amosa is doing something called Television by the People, which is running through Facebook at the moment. Where it's kind of a collaborative format development.
And supposedly Amazon picked their sitcom to put into production after they laid it out for the public to vote.
Yeah, they did pay for all the pilots of the sitcom in the first place, though.
At a somewhat discounted rate, though.
Going probably right into DVD sales. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
My question is related to maybe to the format, but how does 3D come into this game? I know that it's maybe a wave that has been on the top shelf 2 or 3 years ago, but I'm really curious, what is your opinion on that? Because that was all. Is it related what you're doing in some way or not? Or how do you think about this? see some faces.
I think that wave has passed. I think the public has voted, sadly, for people who manufacture 3D machines.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, 3D on the web is non-existent and doesn't look like it's coming anytime soon.
Well, I see some friends hacking 3D content, so there might be a use for it. Huh?
Obviously, if it's free. But no, it just didn't seem like an economic... and we, especially shooting high-end nature things or science things, certainly looked at it, but it just... there weren't enough people that wanted it.
I think the fundamental problem with the 3D is that nobody wants to sit in their homes with these big things on, right? It's a massive barrier to social interaction with other people. You can deal with it in the cinema because you're not really socially interacting with people in the cinema anyway. But I think at home nobody wants it.
It's one of the surest.
No, it's not even.
One of the surest signs that it wasn't going to be adapted was that the porn industry didn't pick it up. There's never been a major technological advance that wasn't first picked up by the porn industry. Sad but true. I'm not saying it's morally correct. I'm just saying it's an observation.
An educated observation.
Sorry to interrupt, but I have one more question. How do you see the chance of foundations funding programs, funding entrepreneurial shows or whatever? I mean, not interfering with a program then like maybe advertising companies would. How, like, it would be somehow in between crowdfunding and web and advertising companies.
Well, I think you already see that a lot, particularly in the States with radio, right? There's a lot of foundation support of things like NPR in the States. And I think that translates very easily to the web. And I think as more and more foundations get more and more sort of digitally conscious and sort of more aware, I think radio has always been good for foundations because it's kind of cheaper, right, than television.
And PBS depends on that, and that has a huge following, and is sometimes forgotten in the television spectrum of the United States. And there are lots of foundations from the states funding all sorts of things, but the lower barrier to entry and aiming at more niche people obviously makes that even more attractive web-wise.
Exactly, because I wanted to go a little further, is because they would probably fund other programs than just, like, would you also work with a foundation together, like maybe, to fund more, for example, journalistic programs, because there have been foundations funding completely journalistic, like newspapers, digital newspapers and things like this. So would you work together with a foundation to fund a program that would probably have an idea that's more journalistic in a sense?
Yeah, of course. I think there are all sorts of different types of programming that work well on the web, whether it's factual entertainment, whether it's journalism, whether it's scripted drama or whatever. I think if anybody wants to help produce something to reach an audience, I think because funding models are so much more flexible now, I think because the costs of entry are so much lower, I think it opens up a lot of new possibilities. So I think everybody would certainly say definitely.
And there is a line of argumentation saying that the future of public service broadcasting could be more the role of a curator and a foundation that serves its public service by actually funding the programs that the market doesn't make itself, and not by owning more and more niche channels and labeling them as youth channels or info channels or whatever. So there is actually a line of argumentation that could be more the role of the future of public service broadcasters, at least in those cultures where it was established. Yeah. Thank you very much for your high attention, I hope,
Thank you.
to our panel, and thank you to the panelists, and well, see you soon, I hope.